Welcome all to Spotlight Sessions, where we shine a light on incredible organizations and the work that they do. I am your host, Josh Basil. I'm a C4-5 quadriplegic, paralyzed below my shoulders. I'm a disability rights advocate, passionate about breaking down barriers to access and inclusion for persons with disabilities. Today, we are joined by Jonathan Kaufman and JKaufman Consulting. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me, Josh. I appreciate it.
I'm very excited to share with the world more about you. So Jonathan, tell us more about yourself.
You know, people ask me all the time, sort of, who am I? And I have always said, look, I was born with a right hemiparesis, a form of cerebral palsy. So that sort of colored my life always, and loved just living with it. It was all I knew. But I also realized in my time growing up that the world needed to change because it didn't function for me. And I said, okay, how do we look at this differently? And how do we go about actualizing change? Now, I thought I was going to be a full-time academic. I really did. I honestly thought that that was the world. But I was lucky enough to have a father who was a practicing physician as well as an academic. And he said, if you could be both the scholar practitioner, then you win, because you're able to do great things outside of just being in an ivory tower, but really be able to have the research and then being able to do things about it. So as I sort of went through my academic life, there wasn't a disability studies program available. I had to create it. And so it was sort of at that intersection between social sciences and trying to sort of figure that all out. But what I was interested in ultimately was the anthropology of work and the culture of work and how work is changing. And there was all this sort of intersectionality that happened. And ultimately what happened is that I started consulting. I started consulting for companies that were like, what is this? What do we need to know? How do we need to know? And that's evolved over the last 20 some odd years, both doing it while I was a student and then beyond. So it's taken me, obviously before COVID, literally all around the world at this point.
With all of that, what type of work do you do with businesses, and is it always touch on disability, or is there explain kind of?
People sort of ask me what I do for a living, and I tell them there's an old anthropological saying is I'm the professional stranger. I come in and companies say, here's our problem. Here's what we need to find a better solution. We need to find a better strategy. So yes, there is a disability focus, but it's also around diversity, inclusion, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. But there's also around areas of marketing strategy, business strategy. I like to think, people pay me because I think for a living.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's thinking for a living and then being able to put that out in the world. It's just, you can make some big differences being a big thinker.
Right. There is an element to sort of the element of creativity, the element of innovation. That for me has been my bailiwick. That's been the world, and taking all of the areas that I'm interested in. And the problem is I'm interested in everything. So it's, I will always be a student. I always will be obsessed, truly obsessed with learning about new things, but also how they intersect with the world of disability and the disability experience, because the disability experience is not monolithic by any nature. It's so different. It's so interesting. So you have different, I always think, sort of silos of innovation. That for me is really interesting. And I think that disability by its essence, to me, disability by its essence is the essence of diversity. It runs across race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic, sexual orientation, but it is the only minority group that anyone can join at any time, which makes it unique. And so when we look at the human experience, that quilt of the human experience touches upon the disability experience and vice versa. So the work that I'm doing is evolving just as the experience of disability is evolving. They go hand in hand.
And with disability, it's just for me, when I talk with families or just anybody in general, any audience, it's for most, it's not a matter of if, but when.
Yeah,
Disability is likely going to touch everyone in a lifetime. Some people, it starts at birth. Others, like myself, when I was a teenager, I broke my neck.
right.
But others, as we get older, we can get arthritis. We can have other things that slowly kind of limit our functionalities
Right.
and or our abilities. So, can you? I would love to get more from you about what is intersectionality. I think people hear that and they might not understand that.
Right. It's sort of like a boogie word. Well, what is it exactly? All it really means is the sort of cross pollination of ideas. I mean, that's how I've always really viewed it. It's a cross pollination of ideas, of concepts that there is that isn't siloed off. You don't have to be one thing. You know, whenever you talk about, well, I'm a person with a disability. Well, what else do you identify with? What other ideas can be cross pollinated into that? It's sort of the best, at least for me, it's been the best way to sort of understand it because there is a complexity and nuance that goes along with it. So when you're talking about disability, isn't just, oh, you're defining it specifically in that realm or that silo, but there are other aspects that one can pull from it, which makes it about the intersectionality, which creates the whole. And so it's sort of that breakdown. I mean, that's the way I see it.
Yeah, I love the way that you teach. I can tell you're an academic and you have the ability to like really break it down and to kind of make it a little bit easier to digest. And I know we spoke before the other month, and I just was blown away that when you were coming up in your education, that you had a professor.
Hmm.
I would love for you just to.
Yeah,
I can't believe that actually
yeah.
that you actually had that opportunity. But
It's a
just
weird thing.
share the story.
No, it's okay. I was a student at the University of Chicago, and I was a graduate student, and a variety of different things. And I was at part of my education. I was doing a dual master's, and part of it was at the Harris School of Public Policy, and was interested in diversity and inclusion. And okay, I wanted to take a diversity and inclusion class, which happened to be at the law school. And lo and behold, this guy walks in. No one really, I mean, we knew who he was. He was a prominent professor, and his name was Barack Obama. And it just so happened it was before he went into politics. Now, the interesting thing at the time was I was sitting on a medical ethics committee at the University of Chicago Hospital with Michelle Obama. So I had met them prior to any sort of thing happening, in his political life. Lo and behold, he was a great professor. It was just really a wonderful class on diversity and inclusion. And what eventually happened was I went off. I left the University of Chicago. I went to finish my doctoral work at Columbia University. And friends of mine in Chicago said, he's going to run. He's going to run for what? I said, I knew he was senator. He had just become senator. And they said, no, he's going to run for president. And it just so happened that one thing led to another. And I was finishing up school at the time and finishing up my degree. And friends of mine called me and said, we're going and we'd like for you to come along. And I said, okay, let's sort of see what the options are. He was interested in building the first ever really disability and inclusion or assistant to the president around diversity, disability, and inclusion issues. And so I was I was in the White House from 2008 to 2011. Now, I was living in Los Angeles, so I was flying back and forth once a month and being on the phone. But the development and the idea of disability being in the White House, and I was doing a variety of things there and helping people who were doing day to day stuff, somebody like Kareem Dale and other people who were there involved with it. I mean, I was essentially a consultant for, the White House at the time. But it was an amazing experience, and it really taught me that this is what I wanted to do after, but broaden it. I understood, essentially how the sausage was made. I understood policy at the highest level and understood what the challenges were for a country. which made me really interested in how organizations run. I mean, and I was always interested in how organizations run and how businesses run. Um, but it also utilized a lot of my other training. I was trained as a psychotherapist, which I do today, and executive coaching as I do today. And I used all of those skills in that experience, but learned a lot about what people need, on a macro level, as well as now I understand doing executive coaching work and doing psychotherapy, what people need on a micro level. So having those bookends are amazing.
And having those experiences, it's just I love that. I live in the Washington D.C. area, so I'm always surrounded by
Right.
politics, But the one thing that, even within Capitol Hill, there's not a lot that can be agreed upon, and even when you do agree upon things, there's always other sides. But disability, I've found more so than any other topic, can be one that both sides can come together. Obviously, we don't always, but just in the spirit of the ADA in the early '90s, that was very much so. Both Republicans and Democrats coming together to do something that I wish was done a lot earlier, but they did come together,
Right.
and it was a great civil rights piece of legislation that was transformative.
Yeah.
And even, I know for me personally, I don't know what the world would be like today if we didn't have that. I know I was injured, good almost 14 years or 13 years after the ADA was passed, but we still have a long way to go. And I would love to know what your thoughts about. You talked about diversity, equity, inclusion. I've been hearing more and more about that in the last 5 years than ever before. And so within the business world, what does that mean for businesses, and why is this conversation, being talked about so much more today than it was in the past?
I think that there's been a cultural shift in a lot of ways, just in terms of capacity, people wanting to talk about these issues, but the need to talk about these issues are so important, and how people identify who they are as they bring their whole selves to the office, or what was the office. This was prior to COVID, but how they bring themselves to work, their whole selves to work, means they're bringing their identity to work, and the value of their identity of who they are is such an essential piece to how they go about working and how they see themselves, and they see their work through a particular lens. So it's important to talk about all of those things of what it really means to be human, and being able for companies to say, wait a minute, we have to mind this. This isn't about, as the economist from University of Chicago, Nobel Prize winner Milton Friedman said, well, the value of a company is for shareholder value. um, BS. It's not that way anymore. It's about the value of a company is the people around them. My grandfather, who ran a company for years, he always used to say, and I never forgot it. He said, "Business is about people," and essentially, that's where we are. We have to understand the people that we work with and what value they bring, and how human beings are so critical. So, if that is the case, then the idea of diversity and inclusion has to be wrapped into the DNA of an organization. That's the reason why. Um, and I mean, look, there are other reasons, but I'm just sort of giving you the sort of 10,000-foot view. But that's an essential component, and then there are all these tributaries that go off into understanding more specific areas. But it's the idea of being human and what that's all about.
I love the way you put it. And so let's say that DNA,
Mhm.
how do we get it within the culture of an organization? Let's say we have a business owner that's listening in today. They're at the door. The door's starting to open.
Mhm.
What steps do they need to take to walk through, or to get through that door? That those initial steps. What's that advice we can help businesses kind of to make that leap?
Well, I mean, I think, look, there's two ways of looking at it. One, people always think about the ADA in terms of compliance. It's that sort of checklist. That's one way of looking at it, but it's so limited. It's so limited in the sense of saying, wait a minute, you have employees with disabilities, whether they have quote unquote come out or not, but you also have the opportunity for a market that has been underrepresented and is an enormous market, even if you have people with disabilities not employed at this point. And there are arguments to be made, but we understand the market itself. I mean, when you're talking about 50, just in the United States, 1 out of 5 people, 56 million Americans with disabilities, and if you're talking about 100 million people with chronic illnesses, let alone people who are long haulers with COVID, I mean, that's a whole other story. But if you're talking about an economy that is a multi-billion dollar economy that can offer a sort of whole host of new opportunities, of a new revenue stream, not only from the market side, but from the employee side, where now we're sort of going through the great resignation and companies are rethinking, what is it really? Why are they, what is it about customer experience? And what can we learn from the disability community in terms of accessibility? What can we learn in terms of employee engagement and experience? There's a lot that can be taught and learned from this community in terms of as we go into a new future of work, which is a hybrid model, which is both remote and in office, and perhaps other things that are coming down the line. So it's a win-win proposition if we look at this community as a way for us to learn, and particularly for businesses to learn, how do we operate in the economy of the 21st century?
For businesses, at least the business that I've been a part of, one thing that my bosses over the years have said is being able to hire persons with disabilities and letting them have like a seat at the table or a voice within the company. It creates such a more diverse group of voices or a diverse group of conversations or way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, a lot of business owners that I've spoken with, it's like they want to hire persons with disabilities, but they just don't know how to find them or the idea of what inclusive hiring means. Can you talk a little bit about what is inclusive hiring for a business?
I mean, when you're talking about disability in itself, it's thinking about needs. What are the needs for persons with disabilities? And again, disability is again a broad spectrum. But what are the needs so that one, you have someone who can come in and be at their optimal or peak performance, and so that one, they can be a valued employee, and it's a win-win proposition. This is not about tokenism in any way. People with disabilities want to work. They want to be able to contribute. They want to be able to say, to be proud of the the idea of work. But now it's a matter for companies to say, okay, we have to create the environment that is conducive for that, so that one, we can have really good employees, but two, give them the tools they need to be at an optimal level where we know they're doing their job and we are providing that. It's part of the engagement. It's an alliance in essence. At the end of the day, you build an alliance between employee and employer.
That's so well said. And it's when a lot of times I've heard, all right, so if you're going to have to do a reasonable accommodation for a person with a disability, it's going to cost $10,000. I don't know why it's always a $10,000 number or something like that, but a reasonable accommodation can be something as simple as $50, something off of Amazon,
Right.
that just, like you said, that gets them a piece of equipment or something that allows them to do what they need to do more optimally and at a higher level. It's just like for any other employee that you might have, you might get a piece of software for them because it automates a part of their work, or it allows them to be more organized.
Correct.
Or to be able to deliver things in a specific way. Like,
Right.
it's persons with disabilities have a very I love to say we're natural problem solvers because we are trained each and every day to overcome barriers and to think differently about creativity of overcoming challenges. And that's a valuable worker that you want to have
Correct.
within your business to contribute.
Correct. If you are going to compete in the digital economy of the 21st century, you need people with disabilities. I mean, by definition, I mean, it's always fascinating to me. And I always think about sort of the tech field. You know, the provost of MIT said to me, 65% of our student body is on the autism spectrum. That means if you take that the fingerprints of people with disabilities are on every technology you have, period. I mean, if you take that alone, and again, you could sort of look, and that's just one area, and you sort of think about it. Elon Musk, the wealthiest man on earth, has come out and said, look, I'm on the spectrum. I have autism. So that alone, what that may say, speaks volumes.
It does.
It's basically a mic drop. Yeah, you think that people with disabilities can't contribute? The wealthiest man on earth, ever in the history of the planet, talks about his disability on Saturday Night Live, talks about it now openly.
I love the way he's put it, and he's talked a lot about kind of just changing the norm of hiring people. Like he's like, you don't need to have all the degrees in the world or this and that and check all these boxes. So many people with disabilities, their resume is not going to look like everybody else's.
Correct.
And it's to recognize what talent looks like
Right.
and what a hard worker looks like and how they contribute. Like evaluate the person. Don't come in saying that everybody has to look the same or
Right.
check all these boxes. Like we got to approach this a little differently.
Correct.
And
Correct.
yeah.
You know, as my
It's
friend said, business is about people. So you have to assess the person.
this is I love talking with you. I feel like I could talk with you for days about these subjects and these topics. And I just want to thank you for your time today. And before we jump off, so with Kaufman Consulting, do you have a website?
Yes, it's www.JKaufman Consulting.
That's easy. .com?
Yeah.
.com. All right. So, just thank you so much again. And I look forward to future conversations with you and continuing to be on this journey with you.
I appreciate it, Josh. Really do. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care, everyone. Until next time, have a great day.